Welcome. You're listening to Latin Waves with your hosts, Sylvia and Sylvia Richardson. Latin Waves is a syndicated show. Latin Waves is more than just hot rhythms. This is a show about community, about creating a culture that is inclusive and based on fairness. Because everyone deserves dignity, respect, and has something to contribute. A new world is possible, and it all starts with us.
In the media and in the policy has been, liberal feminism. And I think that in many cases, what women object to is, in fact, exactly this kind of feminism, which basically has seen equality with men as the fundamental goal, and ignoring, for instance, that men too are exploited in this society, and has seen as exclusive goal entering into the male-dominated areas.
That was the voice of author and educator Dr. Silvia Federici, speaking with Sylvia about her newest book, Revolution at Point Zero. So stay tuned.
You are listening to Latin Waves. We are very privileged this morning to be joined by Silvia Federici. She is the author of Revolution at Point Zero, Housework, Reproduction, and Feminist Struggle. Very privileged to have you on our program. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you to you for inviting me.
Now, when we think about revolutions, there's often the idea of armed revolution, of uprisings, and we often, don't think about the specifics of what it is we're trying to revolutionize or change. So tell us a little bit about your book. How was this book inspired? But particularly is focused on housework and reproduction.
Yes, the Revolution at Point Zero, it's a book that collects many writings I've done over a period of almost 30 years, from the times I was very engaged organizationally in the women's movement to the present. And it tries to provide a framework to think through, what is domestic work and what is reproductive work as a whole, what place it has in society and in our life, in our experience, why it has been made so invisible and devalued, and also the book looks at the transformation that have taken place since the 80s and through the 90s in the restructuring of the global economy, and tries to see how these changes have transformed reproductive work and what impact these changes have had on women, who have been and continues to be to this day the main subject of reproductive work. It's still women who do most of the housework and most of the domestic work also outside of the home on a paid basis. So this is what the book presents some of the earliest essays are from the 1970s, when I was involved in an organization called Wages for Housework, the International Campaign for Wages for Housework. Our position, I think, truly revolutionized the way housework has been conceived traditionally, because it has always been presented as a work of love, as a personal service that women do to their family, to their children, their husbands, and in a way as something natural, something that belongs or issues from the personality, the physical and psychological makeup of women. And we've fighting against this idea, which has been so important, so effective in making this work invisible. Making invisible that it is work. It is social work as much as any other form of work. And in a way, we turned the tables around. We said, housework, domestic work, the whole range of reproductive activities that mostly women, not only women, but mostly women have done and do in the home have been the work that has not only reproduced our life, but has also reproduced the workforce and have reproduced people's capacity to go to work on a day-to-day basis. So far from being unimportant, actually this work has been the pillar, the foundation for every other form of work. They have been really the foundation for, the capitalist organization of work. And we have denounced the fact that, employers have gotten away with a lot of free labor because, without, a person at home, reproducing, workers on a day-to-day basis, reproducing wage workers, every place of employment would shut down. So we really changed the term of the debate, and that in itself, I think, has been a revolution, certainly has raised the consciousness of the social importance of this work, and has raised the consciousness that we live in a society that in a way is committed to the devaluation of this work, is committed to make this work invisible.
I'm so glad that you raised that. When we think of reproduction, we don't think about, the caring capacity that reproduction requires and who provides that. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about the way feminism, as a movement has become both for many women almost an irritant. I was reading recently a journal, and the woman said, I identify myself as a womanist, not as a feminist, because feminist is men versus women, and womanist is all people, to eradicate, economic violence against women. And I thought for a second, interesting. And so can we unpack a little bit how we could do our revolution in ways that it's more inclusive and accessible to people? Because I find that there is a divide between what feminism in the West means to people who do not take race and class into consideration, and what the idea of this perhaps alternative form of feminism, in my opinion, this womanist view of uniting both men and women in the defense of creating a society with equity, how the two could converge, and how the two could find some common ground in this idea of the sexual division of labor, on the, the ways in which capitalism has naturalized inequality and exploitation as ways of being.
First of all, I guess that the first thing to clarify is that although feminism is a general umbrella, there are actually very different types of feminism. For instance, within the women's movement at its beginning as well, after a short phase of seeming unity, you had different political positions, and unfortunately, the one that got more prominence in the media and in the policy has been, liberal feminism. And I think that in many cases, what women object to is, in fact, exactly this kind of feminism, which basically has seen equality with men as the fundamental goal, and ignoring, for instance, that men too are exploited in this society, and has seen as exclusive goal entering into the male-dominated areas, and not ignoring, and for example having access to wage labor, ignoring, for instance, that black women and women from other ethnic groups that have been discriminated have always had to have a wage work, because their husband never had the protection of a wage that white male workers had. And so this very narrow And and also the fact that liberal feminists never placed the question of reproductive work, its devaluation, and the devaluation of women's work. Never place it within a broader context, a context that takes into account that we are in an exploitative society, we are in a capitalist society, and unless those relationships are also transformed, it's not possible for women to receive any justice. The kind of politics that now is defined as politics of gender, where gender is now an absolute term, not really contextualized, within why in this particular society, why in this social system, we have this type of organization of housework, this type of organization of reproductive work. This is certainly one factor that I think alienates a lot of women. Also, there is the impression, and my view is that this has been promoted very much by the press, that feminism is a struggle against men. In my long experience, being in the women's movement and studying the women's movement, very few women actually took that position, that men are the problem. Even if sometimes that was said, because there was in the impetus of the women's movement when it first established itself, many times women found that the first people they had to struggle against was their husband or father, because, for instance, you wanted to go to a meeting and they wouldn't allow you to go out at night, or they would be very upset that you be with other women and not pay all the time, attention to them. But I don't see in the history of the different feminism across the world that actually women have targeted men as the enemy. They have targeted inequality. They have targeted subordination. They have targeted economic dependence. So I appreciate women who say I'm a womanist, but I'm not sure that it really resolves the issue. I think, again, one of the problems of feminism is that feminism has been very much, domesticated. That the kind of broad social transformation that in the early part of the movement, at least in the United States, in Europe, the broad social transformation that many women intuited as necessary, not only in the condition of women, but the society as a whole had to be changed. That was lost, and then feminism was taken on, by the United Nations, government, and domesticated, redefined in a way that could actually support the neoliberal agenda. In my view, this is the problem, with feminism, and particularly, as I said, liberal feminism, which has now been taken by the media and by the international power structure as to be what the feminist movement is about. And this is definitely a problem, because it leaves out a whole problematic that has to do with international political economy, has to do with the dispossession of millions of people at the hand of, the corporation. It has there's a way with the forms of the exploitation of labor in so many different ways, and with the impoverishment that international policies are creating, the destruction of the environment, and the new forms of racism that are, daily being constructed. So I think that in this sense, the dissatisfaction with feminism is genuine. But I would say that this is a kind of institutionalized feminism that is being produced, through the many global conferences organized by the UN, and has been introduced starting with the late 70s, but does not represent, all the feminist movement that today exists in the world. Again, I think we need to really distinguish. Otherwise, we risk to accept the media portrait of what feminism is.
One of the struggles that I think we've collectively faced, men, women, of all classes, is climate change. It's also a struggle to remember that we are part of the land, that we are actually not separate, but part of it. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit, because we live in a world where 80% of all the refugees are women and children. And
Yes,
so the attack on Mother Nature naturalizes, it seems to me, the violence on women and the erosion of productive rights.
the disaster that we have witnessed in the last few days in the Philippines, is a very direct consequence of these devastating policies, because there's a general agreement, for instance, that this incredible wind that shaped that hurricane are a consequence of the warming of the oceans. And the warming of the ocean, of course, are a consequence of the really criminal blindness and criminal refusal, to change form of production, which is in fact destroying the environment. And it's not only climate change in general, but wherever you go, from the furthest tip of Africa to Latin America to the US, you find exactly the same problem. You find the mining companies now are massively expropriated in violent and fraudulent ways, often with the complicity of local chiefs, governments, and so on, people, and then squeeze this land to take anything out, and whether it is gold or diamond or platinum or oil, you have fracking that is destroying so many in the U.S. as well, thousands of kilometers in so many countries. So many places you have the same struggle today, whether it is Canada, whether it is, for example, the case of New Brunswick, very recently, where you have a whole indigenous population fighting against the attempt for the mining company to come and do fracking in their territory, who have come and confronted the police, and they've been beaten, they've been arrested. This just a few weeks ago. In fact, their struggle is still continuing to this day. And not only the land, but the seas and the forests, so we are moving towards a world where people are being made, homeless, refugees, forced more and more into refugee camps or into these mega cities, 20 million people, I think the idea of this corporation, the Monsanto and the mining companies, because there is a real continuity between the politics of agrofuel, agrobusiness, and mining. Basically, the idea of pushing the people of the world into mega cities and then have complete control over the natural resources of the planet. This, I think, is the scenario, the landscape that is unfolding, and all we can hope is that people's resistance will be able to put a stop to it, will be able to reverse it.
The other part, I think, is that we need to maybe explore how we go about resistance, because if the resistance of workers in the Philippines and the resistance of workers in Canada and the US were aligned, we would have very different response. The Monsanto companies would not be able to simply move with impunity. If our struggles
Yes.
were aligned, we would not have to debate whether women's work in the home should be shared work, should be, acknowledged as labor. We would have at least a conversation, and have the spaces to have.
I think it's very, very important. For instance, as an example, this summer, I was in Greece, I was in Thessaloniki, and some friends drove me up to this area, Alkiri, which is in the north of Greece. It's a beautiful, beautiful area, it's a little paradise. It is near one of the oldest forests in Europe. The sea is marvelous, and there are all kinds of beautiful old villages. And right there, a Canadian company from Vancouver, its headquarters are based in Vancouver, it's called El Dorado. And I know because I did some research, so I know it's in Vancouver. It's basically planning this incredible project, which is an open mine extraction of gold, which means that the construction of a huge, huge hole that would be filled with all kinds of cyanide or mercury to detach the gold from the ore. Already they have begun logging from this very ancient forest. So presumably the forest will be destroyed at the end of the process. Actually, the process does not have an end in sight. The gold in the terrain is very small. So in order to dig the gold, they have to move a huge amount of soil, and that will create a permanent cloud in the sky. Permanent cloud in the sky. So the villagers around have been protesting and protesting and protesting. They've been really also, unfortunately, this company, El Dorado, has the support of the government, and the government sends the police. When we drove up to the village, we saw, a police truck stationed almost close to the entrance of the village. And, of course, the connection, if people from Greece could be connected with people who are against this type of practices in Vancouver.
I wonder if we could talk about the alternatives, because in many ways we were talking about creating a new commons,
Yes.
a commons of sharing not just knowledge but also resources.
Absolutely. A number of things I think is very important to realize that even now, with this immense drive to, take over all the land by the corporation, nevertheless, you still have many population in the world. I think Latin America is a good example, who still have the land, who still own land in common, and still manage the land on a community base, on a communitarian base. It's very important to know, because many times when we speak of sharing the resources of the earth, people have been so individualized, and people have been often so, in a sense, convinced that capitalism is the only way, and the notion of private property, that this is and competition, in the labor market. These ideas have become, for many, a kind of second nature. It's important to know, actually, that not only historically, people organize their life in a communitarian base, but even today that exists. So those commons are very much under attack. I want to conclude our discussion by going back to the theme of revolution, because a revolutionary productive work, revolution at point zero, which is the moment of the production. Because I think it's there that we have to begin to change our world, our relationship. We certainly have to create a world that is based on a very different logic than the capitalist logic. We have to build a world that is based on cooperation, and is built not on the exploitation of other human beings, and is not built on the exploitation of the natural world, because this is a world that can only promise poverty, war, and different forms of racism. And already we see how destructive it is of the planet and human life. So the alternative today for many people is encapsulated in the idea of the commons. And In my view, we begin to build the commons, not only defending, those spaces and those natural resources that are all around us and now are being privatized. So we need to build a movement and coalition between people who are struggling around ecology, feminists, and many other social movements to defend those spaces. But we also have to transform the everyday life. We have to transform our homes of reproduction, which has been organized in a way that divides us. It's been organized in a way that really individualizes and atomizes our lives. And, this is not, it's a way that makes us feel more powerless, more alone. So I'm very interested, in fact, of rethinking the home, rethinking the relationship between the home and the community, and seeing how we can, in fact, begin to transform our life, starting from, our relationship in the family, but also the whole social architecture of the home and the way reproductive work is performed. So we need, in fact, to, as part of our struggle, and even as a base from which to begin to reclaim the resources that are taken away from us. But we need to really create a new social fabric. And I think that that's the kind of revolution that we need to begin, in our own life, starting from our home.
As I was listening to you, I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if this society also included, the right to leisure, the right to imagine ourselves, enjoying.
Right, because it's work. There are no women. Women are, in the United States, they are the main consumer of antidepressants. Depression is today a national disease. They say we live longer, but how do we live?
Thank you so much for being with us today. What inspires you? What inspires you to get up every morning and mobilize and organize and continue to do work that many people see as an uphill struggle?
What inspires me is the fact that no matter how bad things appear and are hopeless, children are still born, and they are going to pose questions of us. I remember myself as a child. I used to pester my mother and say, why was I born during the war? I think of the new children, the new generation who are expecting to have a life.
Thank you so much for being with us. My guest is Dr. Silvia Federici. She is the author of Revolution at Ground Zero. Tell our audience how they can access your book.
Distributed by PM Press, or I'm sure also Amazon.
We have come to the end of our program. Latin Waves is a weekly syndicated program available to campus and community radios. Please visit our website, www.latinwavesmedia.com, to hear previous shows, connect to our media projects, and access other resources, or to support our efforts by making a safe PayPal contribution. I am Sylvia Richardson. Thanks for listening.